Let me tell you something that every defense minister from Tel Aviv to Riyadh to Washington understands with absolute clarity, but will never acknowledge publicly. Iran has crossed a technological threshold that fundamentally changes the strategic balance in the Middle East. The Fattah 3 hypersonic glide vehicle, demonstrated operationally 3 weeks ago against Israeli territory, is not simply another incremental improvement in Iran's missile arsenal. It represents a capability leap that renders every air defense system currently deployed in the region operationally obsolete against this specific threat profile. And what I am about to walk you through is not just the technical specifications that make the Fattah 3 unstoppable. It is the evolutionary trajectory beyond Fattah 3 that Iran has already begun, and why that trajectory leads to a regional security environment where defensive superiority no longer exists. I am not engaging in hyperbole. I am not exaggerating Iranian capabilities for dramatic effect. Having spent years as a weapons inspector, having analyzed missile development programs across multiple adversary states, I can tell you that what Iran has achieved with the Fattah series represents one of the most significant asymmetric capability developments in modern warfare. And the reason Western defense establishments are so alarmed, the reason you are seeing emergency procurement requests and accelerated interceptor development programs, is that the physics of hypersonic interception are unforgiving, and Iran has mastered them faster than anyone predicted. Here is what the Fattah 3 actually is, because the technical details matter, and the mainstream coverage has been catastrophically inadequate. The Fattah 3 is a hypersonic glide vehicle with a demonstrated operational range of approximately 1,400 kilometers, a terminal velocity exceeding Mach 15, and a maneuvering capability during the terminal phase that takes it outside the engagement envelope of every interceptor system currently in Israeli or American inventory. Let me break down what each of those specifications means in operational terms. A range of 1,400 kilometers means that Iran can strike any target in Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, and significant portions of Turkey and Pakistan, from launch sites deep inside Iranian territory that are beyond the reach of preemptive strikes. This is not a tactical battlefield weapon. This is a strategic strike system with theater-level reach. A terminal velocity exceeding Mach 15 means the Fattah 3 is traveling at approximately 5,000 meters per second during its final approach to the target. At that speed, the time from radar detection to impact is measured in seconds, not minutes. The decision cycle for defensive engagement, the time required for a tracking radar to acquire the target, compute an intercept solution, launch an interceptor, and guide it to impact, is longer than the time the Fattah 3 spends in the defensive engagement zone. That is not a difficult interception. That is a mathematically impossible interception using current defensive technology, and the maneuvering capability during terminal phase is what transforms the Fattah 3 from a very fast missile into an unstoppable weapon. Traditional ballistic missiles follow predictable parabolic trajectories. Once a ballistic missile is launched, its path can be calculated with precision, and interceptors can be positioned along that calculated path. The Fattah 3 does not follow a predictable trajectory. During the final 40 seconds of flight, it executes lateral maneuvers using aerodynamic control surfaces and attitude thrusters that change its approach vector in ways that defensive systems cannot anticipate. An interceptor positioned to engage a target on one trajectory cannot adapt when that target suddenly shifts to a different trajectory mid-flight. The result, demonstrated 3 weeks ago over Israeli airspace, was a direct strike on a military installation with 0 successful intercept attempts despite multiple Israeli air defense systems engaging the target. That was not a test. That was an operational demonstration designed to prove to every regional actor that Iran now possesses a strike capability that cannot be reliably defended against. Now let me show you how Iran got here, because understanding the evolutionary path from Fattah 1 to Fattah 3 explains where Fattah 4 and beyond are heading. Iran did not wake up one morning with hypersonic technology. Iran spent 15 years developing the industrial base, the materials science, the guidance systems, and the operational doctrine required to field this capability. The Fattah 1, first tested in 2020, was a hypersonic glide vehicle with limited range and minimal maneuvering capability. It demonstrated that Iran could build a vehicle that survived hypersonic re-entry and maintained stable flight at extreme velocities. That was the proof of concept. The Fattah 2, tested in 2022, extended the range to 1,000 kilometers and added basic terminal maneuvering through aerodynamic surfaces. It demonstrated that Iran could build a vehicle that not only survived re-entry, but could be controlled during the terminal phase. That was the operational prototype. The Fattah 3, deployed operationally in 2024, extended range to 1,400 kilometers, increased terminal velocity to Mach 15 plus, and added sophisticated maneuvering algorithms that allow the vehicle to execute unpredictable course changes based on real-time threat assessment. That is the mature operational system. And here is what should terrify defense planners looking at this trajectory. Each generation of Fattah has taken approximately 2 years to develop from initial testing to operational deployment. That development cycle is accelerating as Iran's industrial base matures and as lessons from each generation inform the next. The Fattah 4, which intelligence assessments suggest is already in testing, is projected to have a range exceeding 2,000 kilometers, terminal velocities approaching Mach 20, and maneuvering capabilities that include vertical evasion in addition to lateral course changes. That puts every military installation, every critical infrastructure node, every government facility from Ankara to Riyadh to Tel Aviv within range of a weapon system that no current defensive architecture can reliably intercept. Let me take you inside the defensive problem that hypersonic glide vehicles create, because this is where the unstoppable claim becomes mathematically demonstrable. An interceptor missile must reach a specific point in space at a specific time to destroy an incoming threat. That requires the defensive system to predict where the threat will be at the moment of intercept. For ballistic missiles following fixed trajectories, that prediction is straightforward. For hypersonic glide vehicles maneuvering during terminal phase, that prediction requires the defensive system to anticipate which of multiple possible trajectories the threat will follow. Current air defense systems like Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow 3 use kinetic interceptors. These are missiles that destroy their targets through direct collision. A kinetic interceptor must be positioned precisely along the threat's path, because the kill radius of the interceptor is measured in meters, not hundreds of meters. If the threat maneuvers after the interceptor is launched, and if that maneuver takes the threat outside the interceptor's narrow engagement corridor, the intercept fails. And because hypersonic glide vehicles are traveling at speeds that give interceptors only seconds to make course corrections, a maneuvering hypersonic target operating at Mach 15 plus is effectively impossible to hit with kinetic interceptors designed for ballistic targets. The United States is developing the SM-6 Block IB specifically for hypersonic defense. That system is not yet in full production. It will not be available in meaningful numbers for at least 3 more years, and even when it becomes available, its effectiveness against maneuvering hypersonic targets remains unproven in operational testing. Israel is developing the Arrow 4 system with similar objectives. That system is even further from deployment. What this means in practical terms is that for the next 3 to 5 years, Iran possesses a strike capability against which there is no effective defense. 3 to 5 years is not a temporary vulnerability. 3 to 5 years is a strategic window during which Iran can execute strikes with near certainty of success, during which regional actors must adjust their security calculations based on Iranian capability rather than defensive protection, and during which every crisis carries the risk of Iranian employment of systems that cannot be stopped. Now here is where this capability becomes genuinely destabilizing, and I want you to stay with me, because the strategic implications extend far beyond the immediate military dimension. Every regional government that has relied on American or Israeli defensive systems for protection against Iranian missiles has just learned that those systems cannot protect against Iran's most advanced weapons. Saudi Arabia has spent billions on American air defense. The UAE has deployed sophisticated multi-layer systems. Israel has built what was marketed as the world's most advanced defensive architecture, and all of those systems are operationally inadequate against the Fattah 3. That inadequacy creates a credibility problem for American security guarantees. If the United States cannot provide defensive systems that protect against Iranian strikes, then American promises to defend regional allies become less believable. And if American security guarantees are less believable, then regional governments have incentives to hedge their security relationships in ways that reduce dependence on Washington. We are already seeing this. Saudi normalization talks with Iran, UAE commercial expansion into Iranian markets, Qatari resistance to anti-Iran pressure. These are not random diplomatic developments. These are rational responses to a capability reality that defensive technology cannot address. And the problem gets exponentially worse when you consider what comes after Fattah 3. Iran is not stopping at hypersonic glide vehicles. Intelligence assessments suggest Iran is developing maneuvering re-entry vehicles with multiple independent warheads. That is MIRV technology applied to hypersonic systems. A single missile carrying 3 or 4 independently maneuvering hypersonic warheads, each capable of striking different targets, each requiring separate defensive engagement. The defensive mathematics on that are catastrophic. Israel's interceptor inventory cannot sustain engagement against single hypersonic threats. Against MIRV hypersonics, the magazine depletion timeline collapses to days, possibly hours. Beyond MIRV systems, Iran is exploring boost glide trajectories that extend range beyond 3,000 kilometers while maintaining hypersonic velocities throughout flight. That puts targets in southern Europe, East Africa, and South Asia within range. Iran is researching directed energy guidance systems that would allow hypersonic vehicles to actively track and pursue moving targets, including ships and mobile missile launchers. And Iran is developing cluster munition warheads for hypersonic delivery, allowing a single vehicle to saturate an area target with dozens of submunitions traveling at hypersonic speeds. These are not science fiction capabilities. These are logical extensions of technologies Iran has already demonstrated. And the development timeline for each of these advances is measured in years, not decades, because Iran is building on an established industrial base and a proven design architecture. Let me give you the scenario that represents the operational employment of Fattah 3 and beyond in a regional crisis. Iran decides to strike Israeli air defense infrastructure as part of a broader conflict escalation. The strike package consists of 50 Fattah 3 hypersonic glide vehicles targeting radar installations, command centers, and interceptor battery positions. Israel's defensive systems detect the launches, they calculate impact zones, they position interceptors. But the Fattah 3 vehicles begin maneuvering during terminal phase. The intercept solutions become invalid. The interceptors miss. 45 of the 50 hypersonic vehicles reach their targets. Israel's air defense network is now degraded. Radar coverage has gaps, command coordination is disrupted. Interceptor batteries are damaged or destroyed. And that degradation occurred in a single strike wave, lasting less than 10 minutes. The follow-up wave consists of 200 conventional ballistic missiles and 300 drones targeting military installations, logistics hubs, and critical infrastructure. Israel's degraded air defense network must now engage this second wave with reduced capability. Interception rates drop from 85% to 60%. 80 conventional missiles penetrate. Damage accumulates, casualties mount. And Iran executed this entire sequence using weapon systems against which Israel has no reliable defense and insufficient inventory to sustain prolonged engagement. That scenario is not worst-case planning. That is Iranian military doctrine, as assessed by Western intelligence agencies. And the only reason it has not been executed is that Iran has not yet decided the strategic benefit justifies the regional escalation it would trigger. But every time Israel strikes Iranian assets, every time the crisis escalates another step, the threshold for Iranian employment of maximum capability moves closer. If you are not subscribed to this channel, subscribe now, because what is happening with Iranian hypersonic development is not a regional military story. This is a fundamental shift in the offensive-defensive balance with implications for every conflict zone where advanced missiles might be employed. Understanding what makes the Fattah 3 unstoppable, what the evolutionary trajectory beyond Fattah 3 looks like, and why defensive technology cannot close the capability gap is essential context for understanding the next phase of Middle East security. The mainstream media will show you Iranian missile tests and interview officials who assure you that defensive systems are being upgraded. I am showing you the physics that prove those upgrades cannot solve the hypersonic maneuvering problem. I am showing you why the development timeline for effective hypersonic defense is measured in years, while Iran's capability advancement is measured in months. And I am showing you why that timeline asymmetry creates a strategic window where Iranian strike capability operates without reliable defensive counter. Share this video, because the gap between what regional populations are being told about defensive protection and what the technical reality actually shows about hypersonic vulnerability needs to be understood. The people making decisions about their security, their investments, their future need to know that the defensive systems their governments have purchased cannot protect against the most advanced threats those governments face. The Fattah 3 is not the endpoint of Iranian hypersonic development, it is the midpoint. What comes next will be faster, longer range, more maneuverable, and more difficult to detect and engage than anything currently in regional arsenals. And the defensive technology required to counter those systems does not exist in deployable form and will not exist for years. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications, because this capability race is accelerating, not stabilizing, and every month that passes without effective defensive solutions is another month where regional security depends more on Iranian restraint than on protective systems. That is not a comfortable strategic position. That is the reality of the post-Fattah 3 Middle East. And understanding that reality is the first step toward rational policy that acknowledges what defensive technology can and cannot achieve against hypersonic threats that maneuver at Mach 15. Iran has crossed the threshold, the systems are operational, the trajectory is clear, and everything that happens in the region from this point forward will be shaped by the reality that unstoppable weapons change the calculus of deterrence, escalation, and strategic stability in ways that no amount of defensive spending can reverse.